This is Miki Tsusaka, BCG's Chief Alumni Officer and also a Senior Partner and Managing Director in BCG Tokyo. I'm delighted to be hosting another session of BCG Alumni Leaders. Today we have Brian Elliott. Brian spent a decade with us in Chicago and San Francisco, graduated in 1999, has done incredible things since. He has been a CEO of 2 software companies, also the head of Google Express, and he is now currently Senior Vice President at Slack, which I use daily, hourly, and executive leader of FutureForm, a consortium backed by Slack dedicated to helping companies transform in a digital-first world. So with that, Brian, thank you so much for being here. We'll be chatting about a whole bunch of things around your experience, leading teams, building companies. But let's just start with you telling us a little bit about what is it that you do today?
First, thanks, Miki. It's great being here and great seeing you again. I actually love the BCG alumni programs, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me to chat with you a little bit more too in depth. So appreciate you being here and having me also. So FutureForm itself is a consortium backed by Slack, but also in partnership with BCG, along with Miller Knoll, the office furnishings company, and a group called Management Leadership for Tomorrow. They're a nonprofit focused on advancing the careers, especially of Black and Hispanic Latinx managers and executives. And so on that side, we'll talk a lot more about what we do and what we've been doing. And that's sort of the day job as executive leader of that group. But at Slack, I also lead our own future of work task force, which sounds simple because most people assume looking at Slack that we kind of had this all figured out in advance. And we didn't at all. Slack itself was a very office-centric company prior to the pandemic. Less than 3% of our employees were actually remote based. We had all the challenges that everybody else did. When we went into the pandemic about the shift to work from home. And we compounded it by being acquired by Salesforce in the middle of the pandemic, which added another layer of complexity into all of it. So it's been sort of an adventure too. And the two interweave because we talk a lot about the research in our work internally. We talk a lot about what we've learned internally in the external conversations as well. So great to be here with you and share some of that as well as sort of where things came from.
Great. Well, maybe going backwards a little bit, I know that after BCG, you've led 2 startups, Alibris and Monsoon. And then you went on to Google and now Slack. And so you've had a number of career transitions. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about those leadership challenges and learnings you've had over the course of your career and these multiple steps you've taken so far.
Yeah, I would say that first step was the hardest. I left
That's
BCG.
partly
Yeah,
BCG.
I had a hard time leaving BCG. I had a great time at BCG. It was a fantastic learning opportunity. A lot of lifelong friends, including my spouse, Maureen McAvoy, who I met at the firm. And so, leaving was a challenge, but also that first step was a challenge. I intentionally wanted to go out and kind of roll up my sleeves and get into operating management. And so, when I left BCG, I really wanted to get something that wasn't just a business development or a strategy job. So I actually went to a startup that wasn't necessarily the top one in the stack of where people were looking, but where they would give me a chance to really roll up my sleeves and run at the time a sales organization as well as a partnerships team and sort of build out from there. And that first set of experiences was hard, to be direct. It was learning that people, I'd led recruiting in Chicago, for example, at one point at BCG, and people are oriented in different ways in different organizations. And I kind of learned that the hard way. So it was a quick sort of like trial by fire of figuring out how do you think about the orientation that sales teams have, that engineers have, that customer support people have, because you really need to bring all those people together to be successful. And so it was a lot of people skills that I needed to learn really quickly. Alibris itself was great, but it sort of was one of those companies that was a startup that it would never take off like a rocket ship, but it also wouldn't die. So we took it to a certain level, sold it to a private equity firm, and then I acquired a company called Monsoon out of Portland. The same thing happened again. So I'm a twice serial quasi-successful entrepreneur, I guess, for lack of a better term around it. But both of those experiences were great. I'd taken companies from 35 people to 300 people, had financial transactions getting out of them, but they were also still kind of limited in terms of scope. So after that, Google was just like, let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum from a technology perspective. And I think at Google, I may still hold a record for having been on 3 different job ladders in 4 years. Um, I was business partnerships, I was technical program management, and I was a product leader at Google,
Okay.
which is
Okay.
bizarre and unusual, but that's kind of my career in a way. But it was all rooted around like leadership. It was all around
Yeah.
general management of teams that were trying to achieve complex things, but really involved bringing people together to accomplish those. And if anything, that's probably the sort of root of what I've learned over the course of the past 30 years, which is strategy is great, but it's back to the old line about culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That the quality of people that you surround yourselves
That,
with is a big part of this.
right. So you've done so much in the last 30 years, and somehow you've managed to find time to write this incredible new book, which we're all very excited about. I know that you've collaborated with some BCGOs for inspiration, but the book, I believe, is called How the Future Works, where you push readers to seize the opportunity we all have to rethink the way we work long term and how leaders can unlock the potential for their workforce and working more flexibly than they do today. You shared a little bit about how Slack itself wasn't there when you started the journey there, but maybe you can give us a little sneak preview on what the book's
Absolutely.
about.
The rather large book that sits over my shoulder these days and kind of lurks in my background on a continuous basis.
I see it
So,
right
so
there.
um, the impetus for this is the same as the impetus for Future Forum itself. We kind of went into the pandemic, and I was running a product design and engineering team at the time. And just like a lot of other companies, what a group of us as executives found ourselves doing at Slack was having conversations not about Slack the product, but about policies, like long held policies that we had around people need to be co-located to be effective. We were only hiring in certain cities. And we at the same time had just put into flight a chunk of research around knowledge workers around the globe and what was and wasn't working. And I kind of grabbed this as an opportunity to say, let's do something different here with this. Let's actually go and build something that's a little more forward leaning, looking at the research and talking about habits and practices and what's working and what's not for people. So we've spent 2 years running what's called Future Forum Pulse. It's a quarterly survey of over 10,000 knowledge workers around the globe. Debbie Lovich at BCG has been a fantastic partner to me and the team in building out executive working groups where we go out and we talk with senior C-level executives in companies about the challenges they're facing. And the book is the product of the combination of that research, the conversations Debbie and I have had, and the conversations that we've had as Future Forum with a lot of executives. I think what companies are coming around to, and I even had another company that I had this conversation with this morning, where top-down policies just are not really working, right? So much of this conversation about flexibility and the desire that people have for flexibility has changed in the past 2 years. It's opened up employees' eyes to different trade-offs in terms of their own work and their lives. It's opened up employers' eyes towards a couple of trade-offs, one of which is people can be productive working from home, but the other is I no longer have to think about anchoring my decisions on where I'm hiring to a 2-hour commutable zone into my office, right? And there's a set of challenges in that we all need to sort our way through. But if you want to attract and retain highly talented people these days, which is the basis for most competition, flexibility really becomes a key factor. At the end of the day, though, this entire thing is this massive ongoing experiment that we're all working through. And so what we're trying to do with the book is marry together the research, case studies from whether it's Genentech or Royal Bank of Canada or IBM or Levi's, companies that range industries, just to give people that spark of inspiration for there's probably a different way of thinking than just the conventional wisdom that I grew up with over 30 years of 9 to 5 in the office is the way that work gets done.
Excellent. Well, it is such an important topic. And as you say, it's still work in process, I suspect, for a few years down the road. But thank you for sharing that. You've said obviously the whole book centers around flexibility for the talent pools that we all manage. But I know that you also feel very passionately about diversity of our talent pools. And I wonder if you can comment a bit on what your perspective, whether it's related to the book or your own life experiences, are in terms of organizations embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, and how we can all do better than where we are today.
It is a fundamental root of the work that we do at Future Forum, and one of the things that I've learned often in hard ways of how much I didn't know and understand. From a research perspective, what we found early on, for example, is that sense of belonging with my team, one of the things that we measure every quarter, fell on average for knowledge workers around the globe. Sort of understandable. We were all shoved into these work from home situations. But then when we dug into that, what it actually fell for in the United States, where we can get the race and ethnicity data at a pretty good depth, is it fell for white office workers. It actually rose for Black office workers and Hispanic Latinx office workers and Asian American office workers. And we grabbed a set of academics and started talking about this. And Brian Lowry, who's a Stanford professor, was the first one to say, even as a Black professor on Stanford's campus, I feel the cost of code switching. If I'm on campus 5 days a week, 9 to 5, I have to watch my appearance, how I show up, how I talk, how I speak, and it's taxing and it's hard. And so from that perspective, we've seen this, that sense of belonging among all employees has actually risen again, especially as people have moved into more hybrid modes. But that's been true consistently for underrepresented groups in particular, who desire flexibility more than their white colleagues. And this isn't that they want to be fully remote. Matter of fact, very few people want to be fully remote. They just want the opportunity to disconnect from that, white majority environment to recharge their batteries more often. The other huge group behind this is caregivers, and BCG has done some great work recently. Also, by the way, Emily Coe and the work that Indra has done. Also, caregivers tell us time and time and time again that they need flexibility more than non-caregivers. In the U.S. and in the U.K., it's much more strongly women with children than men with children. 57% of women with children in our latest results said that they want to work from the office 2 days a week or less. That's up from that 57% is up from only 50% back in Q4. So these trend lines are only going in one direction. The desire for flexibility continues to grow. The third part of this, in terms of just thinking about inclusion, is it does two things. First, you have to think about not just location, but time. Time, it turns out, is actually much more critical. Our research shows that schedule flexibility is actually even more valuable to people than location flexibility. And when you think about it, especially for caregivers, that's even more essential, right? If they don't have the ability to do some of their work asynchronously, it's really almost impossible in a lot of situations to do the job. The other is, if you're going to be successful in building a flexible hybrid way of working, you're going to have to train your managers to focus on outcomes, right? And if you're focused on rewarding and growing people on the basis of outcomes, that's a much more level playing field than presenteeism, than proximity to power. And that's what a lot of people who are in these underrepresented groups are looking for. They're looking for a level playing field on which to succeed that isn't based on how many hours I'm willing to show up in the office. So it's a major opportunity for us to reset inclusion in organizations. It's also a major opportunity for us to get it wrong.
Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your data you're bringing to the discussion. So much of what you said completely resonates with me. So thank you for that. Believe it or not, one last question. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of advice over your career. I wonder if you can share your best piece of career advice that you've received thus far.
The best piece of career advice was my people partner at that first startup, who said, and I'll paraphrase, "You're kind of a jerk." And she may have used an expletive actually in the conversation, but it was I was very used to sort of type A BCG highly wired personality, and maybe a little overly convinced of my own ability to be right on things. And she was kind enough to take me aside and say, you're kind of blowing it here, Brian. So I want you to take a step back and think about what you're trying to accomplish and if there's other ways to do it. And if not for Mariah, I think it would have been a much harder road for me to figure that out over time. But it's people like that are willing to lean in and tell you something that's true that you may not necessarily want to hear about yourself, that are really fantastic. Sheila Subramanian, who's one of my co-authors on the book, is also one of the people that over the last 2 years has shown me that I'm one of those leaders that always did hey, look, I just work all kinds of weird hours. Just because I send a message out at 9 o'clock at night doesn't mean I need you to pay attention to it. That doesn't work. Human psychology is, you put that message out in front of people on your team at 9 o'clock at night. If they see the notification and it goes off, their mind is automatically going to start thinking about that. And any break you're hoping they were going to get is gone. So super tactical tip: scheduled send is your friend. But those kinds of lessons are really around, like, how do you think as a leader you want to show up versus how are you showing up? And people who are willing to tell you those truths are really essential. All that said, from a BCG perspective, that truth telling is actually at the root too of where I see BCG being really powerful, which is senior organizations, especially of executives who've been in a company for a long period of time, um, can get mired in their own conventional wisdom, can get mired in what was true a decade or more ago. And the ability to bring in outside voices, even if the outside voices are simply helping them understand what's going on within their own organization, the more senior experienced I get myself, the more I realize how valuable that is, because it's really hard often when you're in that echo chamber of a senior executive, group, to really have people who are willing to speak truth to you. And so that kind of truth telling is also critically valuable.
Well, those are moments of truth I'm sure you carry with you today. And thank you for the BCG lessons learned. I do think breathing outside air is always important for us to keep moving forward. So I can't believe our time is up. It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. And for the audience, please look forward to the next installation of BCG Alumni Leaders. But for today, thank you so much, Brian, for
Thank you,
joining
Mickey.
me.
Appreciate it.